Hello and welcome to this video presentation on the vice presidential candidates that Kamala Harris will be exploring and choosing within the next few days. I'm Altazar of altazarastrology.com and this YouTube channel, Altazar Astrology. If after viewing this video you find these presentations of interest and want to explore more of my videos, please do subscribe and or click the like button. I'm going to post my contact information here briefly for those of you who are new to this, and you'll see that on the screen at this time. And then we will proceed with this presentation. So I'm going to start out with a view of Kamala Harris. I have already done several videos you've probably observed on the comparison between Donald Trump and Joseph Biden and their differences in relationship to the chart of the United States, as well as the karma they have in terms of their character and personalities. And that was part one of my series. Now, as that series progressed, I eventually got to a point where I predicted that Joe Biden would probably drop out of the race and choose a replacement. And I have a video on that, which did describe to some extent Kamala Harris and some other potential candidates for the presidency. Well, it's very clear that Kamala Harris is now the presumptive nominee for the presidency by the Democratic Party. And so this video is going to look at the vice presidential possibilities that she might consider. And we're going to look at it from an astrological point of view. How seriously she or other presidential candidates take this into account, which they might consider actually, is another question. However, all of my exposition on these political candidates, including those I've already talked about, and that has included Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I am not directly endorsing or trying to promote. I'm attempting to display the astrology of the United States, the timing of the planets at this period of history, and what seems to be the emphasis for the progress and favorable development of the United States vis-a-vis the charts of the presidential candidates and or vice presidential candidates in terms of this upcoming year and the election date. So now I'm going to look at Kamala Harris to start with, and we're going to bring up her chart along with the chart of the United States. So now you should see the charts of Kamala Harris and that of the United States. Now I'm going to bring those up again to make sure they're more visible. There we go. So the chart of Kamala Harris I've shared in the previous video when we were talking about possible replacements for the presidential candidate. Kamala Harris is born in the year of the dragon. And the Chinese year that we are in currently is the year of the dragon. So that's very auspicious. That's very supportive when you're trying to advocate or implement an identity expression uh, and it is considered favorably to do so in your Chinese year. Considering that the year of the dragon implies someone who is formidable, challenging, and forthright uh, initiator, and also someone who is inspirationally champion of some direction of political, cultural, or spiritual inspiration. So, and Kamala Harris is born on a Tuesday, which is Mars Day, which is the day of activists. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on Tuesday as well. So, and and she has a very favorable karma here with this Venus, Uranus, Pluto in Virgo, favorable to Neptune, showing she has an inherent sensitivity and sensibility of compassion for the public and for the services that can elevate and advance social welfare. So now we want to look at, and I have talked about this before in previous discussion, but we're going to look at the chart of the United States and note, where does she fit? And you see that I have the chart of the United States in the inner ring, and in the outer ring, we have the planets for Kamala Harris. Now, as I've talked about in the previous discussions of Trump versus Biden and their character and their relationship to the current challenge of the United States, that current challenge and how I'm approaching this is what planetary positions currently in the universe are affecting the chart of the United States. And I have elaborated on the fact that what is most powerfully a challenge that last occurred during the American Revolution in 1776 is the planet Pluto. Takes roughly 240 years to go around a chart and come back to its birth position. Well, guess where it is currently in recent times? It's back challenging the birth position of Pluto. And as I've talked about, the Mercury opposite Pluto is the challenge for the United States as to whether or not there is a democracy and an equitable distribution of wealth that can cultivate a middle class that has opportunities for meritorious advancement through their entrepreneurial efforts, their professional and educational opportunities, and their abilities to contribute to the economy that helps lift all in the country in a more favorable direction. That's one vision the framers may have had, and is a possibility based on the Mercury-Pluto opposition in the houses of economics. On the other hand, the negative side here, which was first experienced by Great Britain and their King George to exploit the colonies of America and tax the folks in the colonies of the United States for the greater upliftment of the royalty and the elite class of wealthy. Well, today we are experiencing a similar, and this is how this term comes to use, plutocracy. Pluto. So the downside of Pluto is the proclivity of the attempt of the ruling oligarchical billionaire and wealthy classes to increasingly attempt to consolidate their wealth and power, and as well use that for political control to dominate the masses of working and middle class people. And so I'm not going to get more into that, but that is the fundamental challenge astrologically, in my opinion, of what this election is really all about, as it is poignantly affecting the chart of the United States at this time. So, how does Kamala Harris fit into this? You see her planets from her natal chart over here are dispersed around the chart of the United States. So this is how I look at a political, economic, and uh, politician compatibility astrologically. And so what I've pointed out in the previous video I presented, Kamala Harris has a distinct sun sign at 27 degrees Libra, you'll see here in the chart, and the section of the chart of the United States associated with politics, public service, and connection to a favorable type of dynamic for uplifting the public. She has her moon in Aries. That's their Aries is the dragon. She has an aggressive and assertive personality. She'd been a prosecutor. And that opposition, you'll see 27, between 22 and 27 degrees, is in a direct cross to the planets that we are highlighting here as the most significant challenge associated with the United States vis-a-vis democracy and the elevation and expansion of the middle class and opportunities for growth and in housing and healthcare and education, etc. Or is it moving more and more towards a feudal society controlled by a billionaire, wealthy, oligarchical elite? So uh, her opposition here to this does imply that she can be a favorable challenge to that downward or negative direction, which some might assert that Donald Trump is the leading advocate for the billionaire class. It shows, a real poignant, motivated inclination to address that issue of whether the middle class, as Joe Biden had been a strong advocate to attempt to try to elevate or promote programs for. Now, the reason I say that is because her Saturn in Aquarius is in a conjunction with the moon of the United States in Aquarius. You see, the moon in Aquarius in the chart of the United States implies that the idealistic framers of this country had a concern to be have the political economic policies such that it could elevate and promote the progressive economic well-being of the masses of people. That's what the moon is all about. Moon quincunx Neptune does imply the United States has politically an idealism to be able to be a democratic country, not only politically for the sake of votes, but for the sake of compassionate concern for elevating or at least having some degree of a social welfare net in our society. So her Saturn right on that moon implies that she can have a serious political direction to further foster that orientation, which is often acknowledged as a liberal orientation for more beneficial social welfare types of programs. So lastly, I'm just going to take a quick look at election day in her chart before we look at the potential vice presidential candidates for her. So now you're going to see Kamala Harris's natal chart here on the right side in the inner ring, and where the planets will be on Election Day, November 5th, 2024. And so, if this is not an absolute predictor, but it does show to what extent there is a positivity going on and a progressive dynamic or a celebrative dynamic for a candidate on election day or not, or some in between possibility. So, what we're seeing here is that on election day, the sun is at 13 degrees Scorpio in a favorable direct complement to her Uranus and will move to a favorable Pluto combination. So that does favor, as well as the sun being in this area of her chart, although I should clarify and point out that all of these candidates, I do not have their most accurate birth time. So I'm using 12 noon, the midpoint of the day, for each of these individuals. I have their correct birth date and their correct location of birth. So it's accurate enough for most all of the planetary positions to be predictive and or uh, illustrative of their circumstance. So what we are seeing here is that favorable sun sign to Uranus being a planet associated with one's political orientation. And Uranus, Pluto, Venus implies that she just has a passionate value for political, social service concern. And we also look to see where Mercury is on that day, the planet of communication, what's going on in day-to-day scheduling experience. Not greatly highlighted here. This Mercury position is not indicating any adverse, if or favorable possibilities of communication dynamics. The other planet we really want to look at is, as I shared, her natal Uranus. Actual movement of the planet Uranus and Taurus is almost exact on her Jupiter. And that implies a kind of favorable, optimistic political, social, cultural experience and expansion. Yet, Uranus having moved retrograde from 28 degrees shows that Uranus was squaring her Saturn position within recent months, which could imply some pretty serious political challenge and struggle to attain her stature and maintain it up to and including election day. Jupiter in Gemini here is not directly moving in anything auspicious in direction of her chart, other than it is moving retrograde. But what we really want to look at is Saturn and its movement in Pisces retrograde. And that Saturn position is opposite her Uranus position. So again, we see that Uranus in recent times, we're talking about probably August through November, in a square to her Saturn, and Saturn having moved back to a position of opposition to her Uranus, implies that there could be some kind of upset that may occur in the process of this campaign that is highly unpredictable or upsetting the nature of the campaign and not allowing her candidacy to necessarily move through smoothly. I can't say what that could be, But I could speculate, given knowing the chart of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and how his position of his sun sign in Capricorn is in a direct challenge to the sun sign moon of Kamala Harris, that could be some wrench in the works there, or challenge possibility. So we shall see. And I'll do a video presentation on looking at Kamala Harris versus Trump and Vance, and also a look at the JFK Jr. factor. But now we're going to move on to looking at potential vice president possibilities for her, and what their astrology can indicate as to favorability or not. So I'm now going to bring up the chart of Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, and we'll see his natal chart and also his chart vis-a-vis the chart of the United States. And we're following a similar line of reasoning here. So we want to look at Mark Kelly and see, well, he is born as a Pisces in the year of the dragon. So this is his year as well, 1964, the year of the wood dragon. Those are higher minded, philosophical, culturally, politically, intellectually astute dragons. And we see here that he has that Mars Sun conjunction that makes him that assertive dragon type, uh, inspirational and self starter. And we see here that as far as a politician goes, he has a social service orientation. Mercury in Aquarius and a trine to his moon in Gemini implies someone who has a good cultivated karma of being a man of the people, one who knows how to communicate with people from all different walks of life and have an openness towards them. Excellent communication skill here with the Mercury Aquarius in a sextile aspect to Venus and Jupiter. So that's, the those who have a philosophical, intellectual, uh, favorable way of ministering and communicating. And he's an idealist with the Mercury square Neptune. So now we're going to take a look at his chart vis-a-vis that of the United States. There's same chart on the left with his planets are now dispersed in the outer circle. Those of you not familiar with Mark Kelly, he is the senator of Arizona, the husband of Gabby Gifford, who survived an assassination attempt, who herself was representing the state of Arizona. He's also a retired astronaut, so he has a lot of the qualities and attributes of an, and he might be a favorable choice for Kamala Harris, as he represents somewhat of a purple state that needs further cajoling towards her direction. And so when we look at his chart vis-a-vis these core issues, I've talked about the challenge of whether we move towards a democracy supporting a growing and opportunistic middle class, or whether we're degenerating into a plutocracy, elite controlled oligarchy that could lend towards a feudalistic society. And we see that, well, the Jupiter here is in Aries, and it's opposite the Saturn. So it does offer a kind of, along with the Venus, his Venus, a favorable sensibility for uplifting the political economic structure of the United States. Venus, Jupiter opposite the Saturn, as that Venus, Jupiter is complementing, as I shared in the natal chart, his Mercury, his ability to be a social humanitarian communicator, Mercury in Aquarius, along with that Mercury trine Saturn. That's a man who, along with his tactful, inspirational, and complementary communication orientation, favors that of a direction for the United States on a political economic structure. And like Kamala Harris, he has Saturn in Aquarius right on the moon of the United States, implying a professional and dedicated and disciplined in direction to support the more average middle and working class vis-a-vis social welfare, healthcare, and educational opportunity. So he is pretty complementary to the United States. And also that moon position of his that I shared is complementary to the Saturn of the United States as well. The Mercury, the moon, the Jupiter, the Venus, all complementary to the Saturn position. Whether his political inclinations and communications addresses this challenge of democracy versus plutocracy, that's not directly indicated. And so that presents a question. But his chart certainly does complement the chart of the United States in terms of a somewhat measured, progressive political orientation for democratic and economic upliftment. Now we're going to look at the relationship comparison between him and Kamala Harris. So now we're going to bring up those charts and see what that presents. So now you'll see the chart of Kamala Harris compared with Mark Kelly. Kamala is in the inner ring, Mark is in the outer ring. And what we see here is that, again, this is beyond just the calculating political analysis that the Harris team may be evaluating. But this is just compatibility. Let's see, let's see if these people can get along. And so what we see here is that his moon does complement her moon. They have complementary personalities. And his moon does also, in an outer sense, complement her sun sign, but his moon does imply a potential challenge in terms of how she asserts her values for political decisions, a moon square of Venus, Pluto here. And as we look at his Mercury position, though, that Mercury in Aquarius is not directly complementing her Mercury or her sun sign, remotely her moon, but his Venus and Jupiter in Aries, looking to see if that complements something here. Well, the Jupiter complements her Mars, So her activist and assertive orientation can be supported by his cultural and social orientation. So there's somewhat of a vague complementary connection here. Uh, Sun sign wise, his Sun Mars conjunction in Pisces, uh, Pisces is just not in resonance with much of her chart except her Mercury in Scorpio. So that is where he can be an assertive support for her ideological or communicative inclinations. So he is he's complementary to the United States, and he is just marginally adverse to a compatibility with Kamala, but mainly uh, reasonably neutral, if not at some level supportive. So now we're going to move on to the next candidate. Before I move on to Josh Shapiro, I neglected to include the perspective on Kelly on election day. So we don't want to forget that. And so on election day, Saturn in Pisces, okay, not direct with his sun sign, Neptune in Pisces as well, not direct also. The Jupiter in Gemini approaching his moon, well, some favorability, uh, but nothing clear. Mercury in Sagittarius is adverse to his sun sign. Mercury square that sun position, not a favorable time for uh, receiving communications. Uranus, nothing indicated there in terms of what might be elevating his direction politically or connecting him to a an important issue vis-a-vis a larger plurality of the population. Then we have Pluto at 29 Capricorn, not making an aspect here really to anything in his chart, as much as that core issue of the United States is being exemplified. So doesn't look great for him, and as I've shared, it's not the most elevating compatibility connection with Kamala Harris either. So now we're going to move on to Josh Shapiro. So now you're looking at the natal chart for Josh Shapiro, showing a man who, is now the governor of Pennsylvania, who has come from humble beginnings and has the typical Saturnian path of having bootstrapped and worked his way up from the bottom, from education and law school through numerous political positions in Pennsylvania and in county politics and local politics, and worked his way up to attorney general and eventually governor in recent years. And so this is not unusual for someone who's a Sun Saturnian and a square to Mars with a brilliant and incredible drive and determination for success. Now, what is interesting about Josh Shapiro is, as we look at his chart comparison with the United States, that Sun Saturn, not unlike Donald Trump, but Donald Trump is at a much lesser degree of Gemini than Josh Shapiro. And Donald Trump does not have the incredible drive and self-discipline that Josh Shapiro has with this aspects I've talked about. His Sun and Saturn in the seventh house, not uncommon for presidents and or major politicians in the United States. And this Sun Saturn position is in a direct trine to the moon of the United States in Aquarius, very favorable for a man who is dedicated through professionalism and self-discipline to be a balanced advocate for public service and social service type positions. Yet the Saturn Sun square Neptune can imply challenges in terms of to what extent he is implementing policies that lend towards a viable and economically sound approach to public service, or whether he is more inclined to opportunism. So, and that's not unusual for many politicians, but what really stands out poignantly in terms of the core challenge of the United States at this time, I've talked about in terms of the plutocracy versus democracy, is that his Mercury is exactly conjunct the Mercury of the United States. Wow. And as I've talked about, the symbolism of that dramatic challenge for democracy and economic viability and opportunity for the middle class is associated with Mercury 24 degrees opposite Pluto at 27 degrees. And so he's right on, right directly connecting as a political figure who could be quite a viable and favorable influence in affecting the direction of democracy versus plutocracy. And so, but lastly, I should point out that his Pluto at this time, on his natal chart, was in 1 degree Libra. And at this time, in terms of where the planets are at this time, and you will see that the planet Pluto is moving around 0 degrees Aquarius. That would be trining his Pluto, which implies an incredible time for his ascension into an opportunity to affect the masses of people in terms of the economic, political environment. So he is quite a formidable candidate right here. Now I'm going to bring up his comparison with Kamala Harris and the election. So now you should be looking at the comparison between Kamala Harris and Josh Shapiro. And he is born in the year of the ox, that is the water ox. Ox is a beast of burden, as I've already shared his chart, and shows that this guy is one hard-working politician and has a powerful ambition for service, and it shows in his the accelerated path of his elevation to stature and position in the political realm of Pennsylvania. Now, as far as compatibility goes with Kamala Harris, That's where there can be some challenge. He looks pretty good for being someone who can be a good support and for the campaign and electability vis-a-vis the United States. Yeah, his Mercury there in 24 Cancer is directly squares her moon and her sun. So his style of communicating, which is intuitive and kind of sensitive, uh, and she's more direct and forthright, they're going to have some negotiability around receptivity with each other. However, it is mitigated by the fact that his Venus in the sign of Cancer is complementary to her Pluto and Venus. So that means they can be, friends and, favorable social associates. And the position of his son Saturn, that core uh, ironclad drive for identity, service, expression, is very complementary to her Mars, her her activist orientation and charismatic inspiration. So that is workable. And then we look at his Mars. Now, his Mars in Pisces, does imply that he has a certain amount he needs to temper his assertiveness at times. He can be over aggressive or under aggressive. Yet his Mars can take a back seat to her Mars in Leo, which is much more demonstrative and uh, commanding. Now, his moon in Aquarius is favorable that he could be subordinate to her Saturnian experience. They've both been attorney generals of her, California, him, Pennsylvania. So, yet her Saturn would take authority over his moon in Aquarius, and that's workable and complementary. And again, what on a personality level, as much as they can have certain different style of political assertion and communication, his moon directly complements her moon 2222. Very favorable personality, complementary connection and or sense of trust and friendship, along with his Venus complementing her Venus and Pluto in terms of shared values and political orientation towards social, political, and public welfare or social welfare. We're not talking about creating a welfare state here by any means. So this looks pretty good so far. And, from his complementary connection with the chart of the United States and that of Kamala Harris. Lastly, we're going to look at Election Day. Now we're looking at where the planets will be on Election Day in the outer ring and the chart of Josh Shapiro on the inner ring. And what we see here is rather interesting because as much as the planet Neptune complements actually Joe Biden's chart in terms of his sun, Venus, and Mercury in Scorpio, that's directly favorable with this Neptune position on election day. Uh, this Neptune position here, right on his Mars, and in a square to his sun sign, I'm sorry to say it doesn't bode well, you know, because Neptune often is associated with diminishing or undermining the energy of an individual and making it so they're not as easily functional in the material, intellectual, and economic political world, because Neptune is about taking space and uh, having more of an open, sensitive, simplified life. I don't know. So, vice presidency could actually offer that. My vice presidency can actually be a more simplified and less challenging life than being governor of Pennsylvania, you know. So, well, we'll see about that, but it's not a favorable energy for an election day. Not to mention Saturn in Pisces is going to. Saturn in Pisces is the same problem that Donald Trump has, being a Gemini in the earlier degrees, because Saturn will be adversely eventually next year, challenging his Saturn and Sun position in terms of uh, to what extent he's really able to push and maintain his identity agenda for political or economic service. But then we look at Pluto. You know, his saving grace is the fact that Pluto is in the very end of Capricorn and moving into Aquarius, and that's trining his Pluto. So that does portend an opportunistic upliftment for him. Not to mention the Pluto aspecting his Mars at this time also presents an opportunistic and once in a lifetime upliftment for him. So to look at just some minor issues, the Mercury position in early Sagittarius is not really communicating anything directly favorable for him. The Jupiter position in Gemini is not directly communicating anything directly favorable for him. So again, what we do see that's favorable for both him and Donald Trump, who's a Gemini with Moon in Sagittarius, is this Venus in Sagittarius complementing his Moon. So it does show, to some extent, the potential for a celebrative time of upliftment for him. That is, if he is chosen to be the vice presidential candidate. So the only other candidate that I see beyond the two I've mentioned, Shapiro and Kelly, is Beshear. And Roy Cooper, I'm not even going to get into exploring. I've looked and I don't see him as a real viable potential. But I'm going to bring up the charts of Andy Beshear. He's the last one I'll look at and talk about his possibilities. So now we're looking at the charts of Andy Beshear natal and his comparative connection with the chart of the United States. So he's the youngest of the potential candidates. He is and has successfully succeeded as a Democrat in a relatively red state like Kentucky. So he's a bridge builder and possibly contribute to centrist Republicans and independents. Now, his chart uh, shows this emphasis in Sagittarius, which does complement Kamala Harris energies in Libra and her moon in Aries and her Mars in Leo. So Kamala Harris is an air and fire sign. Um, Placements has them, and so what we're seeing here is that Andy Beshear, born in the year of the fire snake, has a good portention here in that we're in the year of the dragon. That helps Kamala Harris, but next year is the Chinese year of the snake. And we often look at the post year, the year after the election, and is that a favorable time for the person or candidate we're looking at? And so I know that worked well for Barack Obama, born in the year of the ox, and then the following year for him was the year of the uh, snake or ox, one of those favorable Chinese years. So when we look at his chart in terms of he is much more of a directly favorable, energetic, uh, demonstrative, and charismatic type leader with that Mars trining his sun in Sagittarius. His Saturn shows that not unlike Josh Shapiro, the square to his sun implies he's had to work hard and he's been a bootstrapper in terms of persevering to uplift his identity expression. And yet he is a deeply caring, compassionate, and loving being with his Venus in the Cancer decadent of Scorpio in a trine to the moon. And this is very similar to a position that Joseph Biden has in terms of a natural care and concern for the average working class and middle class citizen. So we also see that he is his Mercury in Sagittarius aspecting Saturn implies that he has a very good, astute, strategic, and political mind. And that is very good for being a bridge builder and working with uh, opposing parties. So as we look in the chart of the United States here, we see that um, what is very favorable for him to complement the critical concern of democracy and meritorious expansion of the middle class. His Venus, similar to Joseph Biden, 24 Scorpio, directly connection to the Mercury of the United States, the critical planet associated with economic and financial resources at this time. And it complements the Pluto position here at 27 Capricorn. And so we also see that his Pluto position is almost exactly conjunct the Saturn position of the United States, which implies that he can be a rather powerful catalyst of transformation to help promote and evolve the economic contradictions and political discord within the country. And he challenges that the Pluto square the sun of the United States, sun sign. He has Jupiter at 4 degrees Cancer, right in a conjunction with between the Venus and the Jupiter of the United States in Cancer. That's the side of the United States that wants to be the mother of the world, that wants to be the caretaker of the world, and find some kind of balanced, meritorious service for our democratic and favorable market system that can also promote economic development in the rest of the world, hopefully environmentally favorable. So he has that natural inclination with his Jupiter natally here in the sign of Cancer. So now we'll look at his comparison with Kamala Harris and Election Day. So now you'll see Andy Beshear's planets dispersed around Kamala Harris' chart. He is a Sagittarius, fire sign, and he is a fire snake. So, yet, what are we looking for here? Well, we're looking to see, is there a communication rapport? Is there a relationship rapport? Personality rapport? Well, uh, we're not seeing a great rapport here. I mean, as much as Andy's chart, if they can maintain a certain, uh, let's say, acceptance of each other, but Andy's moon in Cancer, the sign Cancer, at 20 degrees, is in a square to Kamala's moon and a remote square with her sun. That sun moon opposition, that opposition of someone who is forthright, outgoing, a dragon, direct, forthright, communicative, uh, desiring for uh, action and activism. Uh, and so she may not necessarily have the patience, or he may find her to be too direct, forthright, or impulsive in terms of direction and activity. So there's not an easy complementary personality. Moon at 20 Pisces implies, or the Piscean decadent of Cancer, that he's sensitive and needs a certain negotiable uh, character connection. But that is mitigated by the fact that he is with a Mercury at 28 degrees Sagittarius. So as much as they may not be, real easy on a personal level friends, they his Mercury at 28 is a direct complement to her sun sign and her Mercury. And this is more important, really. They're not going to be living together or going out to restaurants together at the moon and the moon issue. But here they can share direct and understandability for strategies and ideas and public relation dynamics. Not to mention that his Saturn position at 0 Virgo is direct complement to her Mercury as much as direct complement to his Mercury. And that's the most favorable complementary communication dynamics between politicians and or business and economic associates. So that is good. And her Mars in Leo also favorably aspects his Mercury. So there is a good communication dynamic here. What can be a highlight also in the political realm is their Uranus to Uranus complements, hers in Virgo, his in Scorpio, and her Pluto. So they do have similar kind of orientations for organizational development and or humanitarian forms of policies that can be implemented in a bipartisan possibility. So this is adequately a complementary connection with some of the rough feathers in terms of more close personal friendship. And now when we want to look at the election coming up on the 5th of November and where the planets are in Andy's chart, well, what we see here is that Mars is moving towards a favorable connection with his sun sign. So that follows up the election favorably. We want to see, well, where is Saturn? Saturn in Pisces. Well, Saturn in Pisces is, Gemini and Sagittarius are not great signs, just like Trump has, or like even Shapiro has. Not great signs when Saturn's in Pisces. And so we see here that the Saturn square to his Neptune during the upcoming months and is moving to square his sun sign, can imply a rather burdensome and difficult time for him. On the other hand, that can be the challenge of being in a transitional phase towards being a vice president, as Saturn will move into a position here that could complement. I don't think it's going to go back that far, but we also want to look at Uranus, see if that's doing anything for him, and doesn't appear to be adverse yet supportive of any favorable direction. But again, as I pointed out in Shapiro's chart, uh, Pisces being adverse to both Sagittarius and Gemini, and just so happens that Andy Beshear's Mercury is like virtually opposite that of Shapiro's sun sign, and Saturn, which would be down in this position in Gemini, are both adverse to the planet Neptune. And what that does is Neptune kind of undermines people's ability to be focused intellectually or materialistically or politically. That doesn't bode well and can imply disappointment in terms of communication experience in the material world. And that's happening around election day here. So she'll have to decide. I don't have they all have certain challenges and favorabilities. Uh, in some ways, I lean towards Mark Kelly because Beshear and Shapiro do have that Neptunian challenge. I'm not that I'm endorsing her or Kelly, but if I was advising her, uh, I would be inclined to believe that things look a little more favorable for Mark Kelly. So before I close here, I'd like to thank you for following along with this exposition of the vice presidential candidates that might work with Kamala Harris in her campaign. My upcoming video will further look at the campaign between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and also Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and how that could be a rather dramatic alteration to this unique election year. So stay tuned for that. If you find these presentations of interest and want to be informed of future videos, please subscribe and also click like if you want to support the continuation of these. I would like to share, and I am sharing with you my contact information. I am a professional spiritual astrologer. You can contact me through my email address, altazarastrology@gmail.com, or go to my website to look at the whole list of different types of readings I do. And this is my YouTube channel. And for those who do contact me and do mention, that you have observed one of my videos on this channel, you will be eligible for a free introductory astrology reading. So please do email or text me to schedule that possibility. Again, I thank you for your observation and look forward to our next presentation.